The Book of Nonsense by Edward Lear. 1. There was an old man with a beard. There was an old man with a beard who said, "It is just as I fear. 2 owls and a hen, 4 larks and a wren have all built their nests in my beard." 2. There was a young lady of right. There was a young lady of right, whose shoestrings were seldom untied. She purchased some clocks and some small spotted dogs, and frequently walked about right. 3. There was an old man with a nose. There was an old man with a nose who said, "If you choose to suppose that my nose is too long, you are certainly wrong. That remarkable man with a nose." 4. There was an old man on a hill. There was an old man on a hill who seldom, if ever, stood still. He ran up and down in his grandmother's gown, which adorned that old man on a hill. 5. There was a young lady whose bonnet. There was a young lady whose bonnet came untied when the bird sat upon it. But she said, "I don't care. All the birds in the air are welcome to sit on my bonnet." 6. There was a young person of Smyrna. There was a young person of Smyrna whose grandmother threatened to burn her. But she seized on the cat and said, "Granny, burn that, you uncrucious old woman of Smyrna." 7. There was an old person of Chile. There was an old person of Chile whose conduct was painful and silly. He sat on the stairs eating apples and pears, an imprudent old person of Chile. 8. There was an old man with a gong. There was an old man with a gong who bumped at it all the day long. But I called out, "Oh law, you're a horrid old bore." So I smashed that old man with a gong. 9. There was an old lady of Chertsey. There was an old lady of Chertsey who made a remarkable curtsey. She twirled round and round till she sank underground, which distressed all the people of Chertsey. 10. There was an old man in a tree. There was an old man in a tree who was heard burnt by a bee. And they said, "Does it buzz?" He replied, "Yes, it does. It's a regular brood of the bee." 11. There was an old man with a flute. There was an old man with a flute. A serpent ran into his boot, but he played day and night till the sparrow took flight, and avoided that man with a flute. 12. There was a young lady whose chin. There was a young lady whose chin resembled the point of a pen. So she had it made sharp, and purchased a harp, and played several tunes with her chin. 13. There was an old man of Kilkenny. There was an old man of Kilkenny who never had more than a penny. He spent all that money and onions and honey for the wayward old man of Kilkenny. 14. There was an old person of Ischia. There was an old person of Ischia whose conduct grew friskier and friskier. He danced hornpipes and jigs and ate thousands of figs, that lively old person of Ischia. 15. There was an old man in a boat. There was an old man in a boat who said, "I'm afloat, I'm afloat." And they said, "No, you ain't." He was ready to faint, but unhappy old man in a boat. 16. There was a young lady of Portugal. There was a young lady of Portugal whose ideas were excessively nauseous. She climbed up a tree to examine the sea, but declared she would never leave Portugal. 17. There was an old man of Moldavia. There was an old man of Moldavia who had the most curious behavior. For while he was able, he slept on a table, that funny old man of Moldavia. 18. There was an old man of Madras. There was an old man of Madras who rode on a cream-colored ass, but the length of its ears so promoted his fears that it killed that old man of Madras. 19. There was an old person of Leeds. There was an old person of Leeds whose head was infested with beets. She sat on a stool and ate gooseberry fool, which agreed with the person of Leeds. 20. There was an old person of Hurst. There was an old person of Hurst who drank when he was not athirst. When they said, "You'll grow fatter," he answered, "What matter?" A globular person of Hurst. 21. There was a young person of Crete. There was a young person of Crete whose toilet was far from complete. She dressed in a sack spickle-speckled with black, that omnivorous person of Crete. 22. There was an old man of the Isles. There was an old man of the Isles whose face was paraded with smiles. He sang "Hightum Diddley" and played on the fiddle, that eminent man of the Isles. 23. There was an old person of Buda. There was an old person of Buda whose conduct grew ruder and ruder, till at last with a hammer they silenced his clamour. by smashing that person of Buddha. 24. There was an old man of Colombia. There was an old man of Colombia who was thirsty and called out for some beer, but they brought it quite hot in a small copper pot, which disgusted that man of Colombia. 25. There was a young lady of Dorking. There was a young lady of Dorking who bought a large bonnet for walking, but its color and size so bedazzled her eyes that she very soon went back to Dorking. 26. There was an old man who supposed that his street door was partially closed, but some very large rats ate his coats and his hats, where that feudal old gentleman does. 27. There was an old man of the West. There was an old man of the West who wore a pale plum-colored vest, and I said, "Does it fit?" He replied, "Not a bit, but uneasy old man of the West." 28. There was an old man of a Wrekin. There was an old man of a Wrekin whose shoes made a horrible crackin'. But I said, "Tell us whether your shoes are of leather, or of what, you old man of a Wrekin." 29. There was a young lady whose eyes were unique as to color and size, and she opened them wide. People all turned aside and started away in surprise. 30. There was a young lady of Norway. There was a young lady of Norway who casually sat in a doorway. When the door squeezed her flat, she exclaimed, "What a wet!" This courageous young lady of Norway. 31. There was an old man of Vienna. There was an old man of Vienna who lived upon tincture of senna, but the wet did not agree. He took Camoleon tea, that nasty old man of Vienna. 32. There was an old person whose habits induced him to feed upon rabbits. When he'd eaten 18, he turned perfectly green, upon which he relinquished those habits. 33. There was an old person of Dover. There was an old person of Dover who rushed through a field of blue clover, but some very large bees stung his nose and his knees, so he very soon went back to Dover. 34. There was an old man of Marseille. There was an old man of Marseille whose daughters wore bottle-green wails. They caught several fish which they put in a dish and sent to their pa at Marseilles. 35. There was an old person of Cadets. There was an old person of Cadets who was always polite to the ladies, but in handing his daughter he fell into the water, which drowned that old person of Cadets. 36. There was an old person of Basing. There was an old person of Basing whose presence of mind was amazing. He purchased a steed which he rode at full speed and escaped from the people of Basing. 37. There was an old man of Quebec. There was an old man of Quebec. A beetle ran over his neck, but he cried, "With a needle I'll slay you, O beetle!" That angry old man of Quebec. 38. There was an old person of Felle, whose conduct was dubious and wily. He rushed up a palm when the weather was calm and observed all the ruins of Felle. 39. There was a young lady of Boot. There was a young lady of Boot who played on a silver-gilt flute. She played several tricks to her uncle's white pigs, that amusing young lady of Boot. 40. There was a young lady whose nose was so long that it reaches to her toes. So she hired an old lady whose conduct was steady to carry what a wonderful nose. 41. There was an old man of Apulia. There was an old man of Apulia whose conduct was very peculiar. He fed 20 sons upon nothing but buns, that whimsical man of Apulia. 42. There was an old man with a poker. There was an old man with a poker who painted his face with red ochre. And I said, "You're a guy." He made no reply, but knocked them all down with his poker. 43. There was an old person of Prague. There was an old person of Prague who was suddenly seized with a plague. But I gave him some butter which caused him to mutter, and cured that old person of Prague. 44. There was an old man of the north. There was an old man of the north who fell into a basin of broth, but the laudable cook fished him out with a hook, which saved that old man of the north. 45. There was an old person of mold. There was an old person of mold who shrank from sensations of cold, So he purchased some muffs, some fuse, and some fluffs, and wrapped himself up from the cold. 46. There was an old man of Neapol. There was an old man of Neapol, whose horse had a terrible fall, but woe split quite in two with some very strong glue, where mended that man of Neapol. 47. There was an old man of Abruzzi. There was an old man of Abruzzi, so blind that he couldn't his foot see, and he said, "What's your toe?" He replied, "Is it so?" That doubtful old man of Abruzzi. 48. There was an old person of Rhodes. There was an old person of Rhodes, who strongly objected to toads. He played several cousins to catch them by dozens, that futile old person of Rhodes. 49. There was an old man of Peru. There was an old man of Peru, who watched his wife making a stew. But once by mistake in the stove she did bake that unfortunate man of Peru. 50. There was an old man of Melrose. There was an old man of Melrose, who walked on the tips of his toes. But we said, "It ain't pleasant to see you at present, you stupid old man of Melrose." 51. There was a young lady of Lucca. There was a young lady of Lucca, whose lovers completely forsook her. She ran up a tree and said "fiddly-dee," which embarrassed the people of Lucca. 52. There was an old man of Bohemia. There was an old man of Bohemia, whose daughter was christened Euphemia. But one day, to his grit, she married a thief, which grieved that old man of Bohemia. 53. There was an old man of Vesuvius. There was an old man of Vesuvius, who studied the works of Vitruvius, and the flames burned his book, to drinking it took, but morbid old man of Vesuvius. 54. There was an old man of Cape Horn. There was an old man of Cape Horn, who wished he had never been born. So he sat on a chair till he died of despair, the dolorous man of Cape Horn. 55. There was an old lady whose folly. There was an old lady whose folly inducted her to sit in a holy, whereupon by a throne, her dress being torn, she quickly became melancholy. 56. There was an old man of Corfu. There was an old man of Corfu, who never knew what he should do. So he rushed up and down till the sun made him brown, that bewildered old man of Corfu. 57. There was an old man of the south. There was an old man of the south, who had an immoderate mouth, but in swallowing a dish that was quite full of fish, he was shocked, that old man of the south. 58. There was an old man of the Nile. There was an old man of the Nile, who sharpened his nails with a file, till he cut off his thumbs, and said calmly, "This comes of sharpening one's nails with a file." 59. There was an old person of Reims. There was an old person of Reims, who was troubled with horrible dreams. So, to keep him awake, they fed him on cake, which amused that old person of Reims. 60. There was an old person of Cromer. There was an old person of Cromer, who stood on one leg to read Homer. When he found he grew stiff, he jumped over the cliff, which concluded that person of Cromer. 61. There was an old person of Troy. There was an old person of Troy, whose drink was warm, brandy and salt, which he took with a spoon by the light of a moon, in sight of the city of Troy. 62. There was an old man of a Dee. There was an old man of a Dee, who was sadly annoyed by a flea, and he said, "I will scratch it." I gave him a hatchet, which grieved that old man of a Dee. 63. There was an old man of Dundee. There was an old man of Dundee, who frequented the top of a tree. When disturbed by the crows, he abruptly arose, and exclaimed, "I'll return to Dundee." 64. There was an old person of Tring. There was an old person of Tring, who embellished his nose with a ring. He gazed at the moon every evening in June, that ecstatic old man of Tring. 65. There was an old man on some rocks. There was an old man on some rocks, who shut his wife up in a box. When she said, "Let me out," he exclaimed, "Without doubt you will pass all life in that box." 66. There was an old man of Koblenz. There was an old man of Koblenz, the length of whose legs was immense. He went with one pranks from Turkey to France, but surprising old man of Koblenz. 67. There was an old man of Calcutta. There was an old man of Calcutta who per pulty ate bread and butter, till a great bit of muffin on which he was stuffing shook that horrid old man of Calcutta. 68. There was an old man in a pew. There was an old man in a pew whose waistcoat was spotted with blue, but he tore it in pieces to give to his nieces, a cheerful old man in a pew. 69. There was an old man who said how. There was an old man who said, how should I flee with that horrible cow? I will sit on the stile and continue to smile, which may soften the heart of that cow. 70. There was a young lady of Hull. There was a young lady of Hull who was chased by a violent bull, but she seized on a spade and called out, who's afraid? Which distracted that violent bull. 71. There was an old man of Whitehaven. There was an old man of Whitehaven who danced a quadrille with a raven, but he said, it's absurd to encourage this bird, so he smashed that old man of Whitehaven. 72. There was an old man of Leghorn. There was an old man of Leghorn, the smallest that ever was born, but quickly stepped up he was once be a puppy, who devoured that old man of Leghorn. 73. There was an old man of Vihegur. There was an old man of Vihegur whose ideas were excessively vague. He built a balloon to examine the moon, the deluded old man of Vihegur. 74. There was an old man of Jamaica. There was an old man of Jamaica who suddenly married a Quaker, but she cried out, alack, I've married a black, which distressed that old man of Jamaica. 75. There was an old person of Dutton. There was an old person of Dutton whose head was as small as a button, so to make it look big he purchased a wig and rapidly rushed about Dutton. 76. There was a young lady of Tyre. There was a young lady of Tyre who swept the loud chords of a lyre. At the sound of each sweep she enraptured the deep and enchanted the city of Tyre. 77. There was an old man who said, hush. There was an old man who said, hush, I perceived a young bird in this bush. And I said, is it small? He replied, not at all. It is 4 times as big as the bush. 78. There was an old man of the East. There was an old man of the East who gave all his children a feast, but they all ate so much and their conduct was such that it killed that old man of the East. 79. There was an old man of Kamchatka. There was an old man of Kamchatka who possessed a remarkable fat cow. His gait and his waddle were held as a model to all the fat dogs in Kamchatka. 80. There was an old man of the coast. There was an old man of the coast who placidly sat on the post, but when it was cold he relinquished his hold and called for some hot buttered toast. 81. There was an old person of Bangor. There was an old person of Bangor whose face was distorted with anger. He tore off his boots and subsides on roots, that irascible person of Bangor. 82. There was an old man with a beard. There was an old man with a beard who sat on a horse when he reared. But I said, never mind, you will fall off behind, you propitious old man with a beard. 83. There was an old man of the West. There was an old man of the West who never could get any rest, so they set him to spin on his nose and his chin, which cured that old man of the West. 84. There was an old person of Annerley. There was an old person of Annerley whose conduct was strange and unmannerly. He rushed down the strand with a pick in each hand, but returned in the evening to Annerley. 85. There was a young lady of Troy. There was a young lady of Troy whom several large flies did annoy. Some she killed with a thumb, some she drowned at the pump, and some she took with her to Troy. 86. There was an old person of Berlin. There was an old person of Berlin whose form was uncommonly thin, till he once, by mistake, was mixed up in a cake so baked that old man of Berlin. 87. There was an old person of Spain. There was an old person of Spain who hated all trouble and pain, so he sat on a chair with his feet in the air, but Ambargo's old person of Spain. 88. There was a young lady of Russia. There was a young lady of Russia who screamed so that no one could hush her. Her screams were extreme. No one heard such a scream as was screamed by that lady of Russia. 89. There was an old man who said, well, will nobody answer the spell? I've pulled day and night and my hair has grown white, but nobody answers the spell. 90. There was a young lady of Wales. There was a young lady of Wales who caught a large fish without scales. And she lifted her hook, she exclaimed, "On you look, that aesthetic young lady of Wales." 91. There was an old person of Cheadle. There was an old person of Cheadle who was put in the stocks by the beadle for stealing some pigs, some coats, and some wigs. That horrible person of Cheadle. 92. There was a young lady of Welling. There was a young lady of Welling whose praise all the world was a telling. She played on a harp and caught several carp, that accomplished young lady of Welling. 93. There was an old person of Tartary. There was an old person of Tartary who divided his jugular artery. But he scratched to his wife, and she said, "All my life your death will be felt by all Tartary." 94. There was an old person of Chester. There was an old person of Chester whom several small children did pester. They threw some large stones, which broke most of his bones. It is pleased with old person of Chester. 95. There was an old man with an owl. There was an old man with an owl who continued to bother and howl. He sat on a rail and imbibed bitter ale, which refreshed that old man and his owl. 96. There was an old person from Kretna. There was an old person of Kretna who washed down the crater of Etna. And they said, "Is it hot?" He replied, "No, it's not, but Mendekius, old person of Kretna." 97. There was a young lady of Sweden. There was a young lady of Sweden who went by the slow train to Weeden, and we cried, "Weeden station." She made no observation, but thought she should go back to Sweden. 98. There was a young girl of Mallorca. There was a young girl of Mallorca whose aunt was a very fast walker. She walked 70 miles and leaped 15 stiles, which astonished that girl of Mallorca. 99. There was an old man of a cape. There was an old man of a cape who possessed a large Barbary ape. Till the ape one dark night set the house all alight, which burned that old man of a cape. 100. There was an old lady of Prague. There was an old lady of Prague whose language was Hobble-Wag. And they said, "Are we caps?" She answered, "Perhaps, that oracle lady of Prague." 101. There was an old person of Sparta. There was an old person of Sparta who had 25 sons and 1 daughter. He fed them on snails and weighted them in scales. What a wonderful person of Sparta. 102. There was an old man at a casement. There was an old man at a casement who held up his hands in amazement. And they said, "Sir, you'll fall." He replied, "Not at all, but incipient old man at a casement." 103. There was a young lady of Clare. There was a young lady of Clare who was sadly pursued by a bear. When she found she was tired, she abruptly expired, but unfortunate lady of Clare. 104. There was an old person of Ems. There was an old person of Ems who casually fell in the Thames, and when he was found, they said he was drowned, that unlucky old person of Ems. 105. There was an old person on whose nose. There was an old person on whose nose most birds of the air could repose, but they all flew away at the closing of day, which relived that old man and his nose. 106. There was a young lady of Parma. There was a young lady of Parma whose conduct grew calmer and calmer, and they said, "Are you dumb?" She merrily said, that provoking young lady of Parma. 107. There was an old person of Burton. There was an old person of Burton whose answers were very uncertain, and they said, "How do you do?" He replied, "Who are you?" That distressing old person of Burton. 108. There was an old man of Aosta. There was an old man of Aosta who possessed a large cow, but he lost her. And I said, "Don't you see? She was rushed up a tree, you inwardous old man of Aosta." 109. There was an old person of Ewell. There was an old person very well, who chiefly was tight and cruel. But to make it more nice, he inserted some mice, which refreshed that old person of evil.